Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight at the beautiful Athenaeum Theatre as part of the Wheeler Center's Mayhem series of events. My name is Ronnie Scott. I'm a writer, and I'm a lecturer just up the road at RMIT. And across from me, of course, is the wonderful Max Porter. Hi, Max.
Hi.
Max is here to talk to us about his books Grief is the Thing with Feathers, which was published in 2015 and is beloved of many, and also his new book, Lanny, published just this year and already, from the readers that I have spoken to, quite beloved as well. So before I introduce the books briefly, because I guess some people will have read Grief is the Thing with Feathers and not Lanny, and vice versa, it's really important to acknowledge that the stories that we tell in Melbourne today and the conversations that we have on stages like this one are just some of the stories and some of the conversations among many in sort of the past and the present. And in Melbourne, that means acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. It's one of the many reasons to acknowledge them. And here, that's the Kulin Nation. So before we start, we pay respects to their elders, past and present and emerging. So Grief is the Thing with Feathers is a hard book to describe, but an easy book to praise. It's beautiful, intoxicating, deep, and strange, and it deals with both the wonder and the brevity of life. It's a story about a family of 4 that's become a family of 3, with the recent loss of a mother and a wife. At the start of the book, though, a dad and 2 sons unexpectedly become a family of 4 again, when they're visited by a mysterious creature called Crow. The character Crow is an otherworldly and innerworldly and literary worldly creation with, and here I'm quoting the book, a rich smell of decay, a sweet furry stink of just beyond edible food and moss and leather and yeast. And although Crow's visitations are odd and discomforting things, there is also the sense among the family that Crow is somehow needed. The follow-up, Lanny, is also a tough book to describe and an easy book to praise. It's inventive and harrowing, and by turns smart and sad, and how it deals with the responsibilities of parenting, of making art, and living in a community that happens to contain people both very like ourselves and very unlike us as well. And at its center, if you haven't read it, is a child who's interesting in the way that all children are interesting, with their signature blend of wisdom and naivety. But then this child, Lanny, is also interesting in a way that not all children are interesting, not least to a bizarre figure named Dead Papa Toothwort, a figure built of mysterious sources and with mysterious goals in mind. Maybe that's enough to say about the 2 books, and the other better way to introduce them would be with a reading from Max Porter from Lanny.
Thank you. You talk about the book so beautifully. You should write the cover copy. I'm going to read to you just for about 6 or 7 minutes to give you a taste of each of the different characters. The only character you never really hear from in this book is Lanny. This is Lanny's dad. I wake up, fists clenched and buzzing, certain of someone in the house. Someone downstairs. I used to get this a lot, but I'm more accustomed to the sound of the village now. I know a hedgehog making his way along the planted borders. I know the postman's early footsteps on the gravel. I know the alien hum of Mrs. Larton's late-night tumble drying. This isn't that. There is a human body moving. There's someone in my house. I don't wake her. I get the cricket bat from the wardrobe, and the little bones in my feet crack as I tiptoe out of the bedroom. My pulse is loud in my ears as I creep across the landing and pause, listening at the top of the stairs. Nothing but my thump, thump, thump. Gingerly down the stairs, nothing. The words in my brain from the script of Terrified Male Homeowner, come on then, you fucking fuck! And the bladder squirm because I have no actual defensive power. I am not brave. I do not fight. I have never fought. I work in asset management and only fight in quite subtle ways on Microsoft Outlook. I'm terrified. There's nobody in the kitchen, but it shits me up being in there, imagining someone looking in, loads of them, lines and lines of men with Hessian faces, with razor wire and acid, farmers by day, killers by night, invisible just beyond the window pane, watching one of their numbers stalk me through this house. Jesus! It scares and humiliates me. So I start to swagger a bit, performing the just looking, in case I am being watched. How daft to be worried about what people think, even as I genuinely think there is an intruder in my home. Nobody in the hallway, nobody in the lounge, no axe between my shoulder blades, no shotgun pointed to the back of my head. Behind me, just the corners of my house. In front of me, just a dark interior designed by my stylish wife, my own reflection. Then I fling open the understairs cupboard and feel a real proper chest pain, an angina spasm of dread. And then there is a tight squawk from upstairs. Robert! I run up 3 steps at a time, imagining with absolute conviction and clarity that there is a big man in a dark cloak in my bedroom and he has a knife against my wife's throat. And I stride in, bat raised, and she's sitting up in bed. I heard something. Me too, I can't find anything. My ballsy woman, she looks fucking terrified. She whispers, in here. There's someone in here. There's something in the room. I run over, bat in hand, and I jump into bed beside her, suddenly childlike and not brave at all. I think of newspapers printing photos of our blood-stained walls. My heart is whomping in my chest. Is he in the wardrobe? Is he made of sheets? Is he in the ceiling? Is he in my wife's skin? Is she hiding him? Can I kill a person? Will it hurt? Will he torture us? I'm frightened. A rustle and a movement right here under us, under the bed. There's a man under our bed, in our bedroom. We're going to be killed in our beds. She's gripping my hand as hard as she gripped it when our son came ripping his way into the world. I need to do this. Maybe it's a lost cat or a frightened refugee or a dying fox or a robed poltergeist. So I need to do this quickly and surprise myself with bravery. So without too much pause, curiously calmed by the recognition that she needs me, that I'm caring for her, I roll out of bed and I land on the floor with a thump and I raise my arm ready to swipe the bat hard across the carpet, ready to smash my bat again and again into the face of the man. And under the bed, eyes wide open, possibly asleep, possibly awake, is Lanny. Lying stiff and long like a rolled up rug with his arms by his side under our bed, gazing beyond me. Our child, no expression whatsoever on his face. Later, both of us are awake and talking it over. She says, I was too angry. You called him a fucking freak. I know. You need to apologize tomorrow. He's grown up enough to know that he gave us a fright and I was angry. And he needs to stop doing things like this. It's worrying. You need to apologize to him. I know. I was appalled. I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever been more frightened in my whole life. Shall we spoon? Please. Pete. Very strange mood. Drank a few beers and then some whiskey, then some not ready slow gin. The sound in the village was all wrong. I went for my walk around the block and got the ill feeling and hurried back. The darkness was uneven, slippery. I sought refuge in my kitchen, but the pressure between different objects in my house was all wrong. Something was bad. I had a glass of drink on the table, a newspaper and a pen, and the 3 of them were fit to lift off and explode. Things were closing in. I sat and I breathed 6 in, 6 out. On the fridge was a postcard from my friend Ben, a Revilius, the wonky Westbury horse with the train popping along behind. I've treasured it for years. And I looked at this image, this lovely English thing, and I felt sick. Bile in my mouth, neck sweating like a fever, and I grabbed it off the fridge and I was going to rip it up, but that didn't seem to satisfy the hatred I felt towards it, which was something long, something accumulated. I necked a load more gin, stared at the postcard, and I hated that quaint image. Hatred for this card had seemingly been hiding under the surface of my quiet existence for God knows how long. My whole hateful, guilty life queued up, ready to land on this poor image. I loathed it in ways I'd been keeping about my person, in my beard, in my ears, under my fingernails. Since my parents told me to sod off because I was a faggot and a disgrace. Since I first read those pamphlets about what the brave Englishman did in Bengal, did in Kenya, did in Northern Ireland. Since I first watched animals slaughtered. Since I first sold my fucking soul to a London gallery, to a glossy magazine. Since I first saw supermarket carrier bags in the throats of rotting seabirds. Since I saw behind the crematorium curtain to the giggling assistants, dropping ash on the floor. And it's all queued up, these painful things. I don't know what was going on, but I was steaming now. Growling, vexed. I got a biro, I sat down and I very carefully drew lines across that postcard, and then I rotated it and drew lines across those lines, a grid to obscure the lush Wiltshire hills, the mysterious Neolithic bullshit, the pleasing clouds, the lovely chuff-chuff two-dimensional train. Fuck every lying English watercolour acre before and after it, every moron riding it, and again and across, hatching, tightening the grid. Eric Revilius disappearing into the dark night again, poor man. Shiny black ink smudging and denting and obliterating a nice gesture of my friend Ben. I did not know myself. I did not know what on earth I was. Lanny's mum. I can't sleep. Robert's breathing sounds like a small door catching the carpet as it opens. Click, scuff, somebody enter, click, scuff. Somebody leave. I usually sleep well, but the village is tight and muggy tonight. When I was very unwell, when Lanny was a baby in London, I read all sorts of things designed to scare young mums about cot death and crushing, choking and allergies, flat skulls and bent backs, damaged eyes and bad milk. And one night I woke up and Lanny wasn't breathing. And I accepted it. I accepted it easily. It was the middle of the night and I was thirsty and I'd forgotten my lines and the duvet was boiling and I'd been dreaming about that film where the man in the barn pretends to be Jesus. The streetlights were toxic yellow through the curtains and the baby had died. I lay very still. I didn't touch him. I didn't scream. I didn't move or wonder where Robert was or panic or cry. I lay still and I could think clearly. It's over now and you can have yourself back, I thought to myself. This tragedy will be the whole story of your life, but it's your life, and you can sleep forever and ever if needs be. You've won sleep and lost fear. No more baby. I remember that night, and I strangely cherish it. I am comfortable in my bed, in this house, in this countryside. I remember a bit of a prayer or a lyric about passing unharmed through fate's unkind embrace. I won't read Dead Papa Toothwort. Maybe we do that later.
Okay. Thank you. So, first of all, that was really tremendous, and
Thanks.
yeah, and it's true. And second of all, it gives us such
No one's ever called me tremendous before, Ronnie. A tremendous twat. I've had that.
I'll call you tremendous again if you. You're tremendous, but also it gives us such a terrific way, a tremendous way, I guess, into talking about what is interesting and effective about this book, right? Because you give us this kind of polyphonic view of lots of different people's interior lives, some of whom are very closely connected to each other. So there's a family, there's Lanny, who we don't hear from, but we hear so much from his father and his mother. But they have these very fully realized selves. I mean, even just from those little grabs of his father and his mother, we get a sense of what motivates them and what they're afraid of. And it makes me wonder, some writers lead with ideas, some writers lead with plot. Do you lead with voice and character?
Yes. I certainly am not, I wouldn't say I'm a plot specialist. I managed to put a tiny bit of plot in this book, but it was painful to do so. It's voice. We'll discuss it later, but the cacophony of voices, the kind of patterned, overheard village. What I wanted to do, and I believe you can do it relatively economically, relatively quickly, is for your characters to rise up out of that to the point that they bring everyone else with them. So just because I've only focused on 4 characters, I hope everyone is as realized as that. I think you can do it quite deftly if you sketch people right, and that's to do with not relying on the kind of baggy mannerisms of the realist novel. I don't believe readers are incredibly accomplished, both readers of novels and watchers of telly. And, you know, we understand character far more than a lot of novelists give us credit for. We don't need things coloured in and modelled in ways that a lot of writers assume we do. You can do it with the telling detail, or you can do it with the nuanced character sketch or something. For me, the voice is the easy thing. I hear voices. One hears voices. So that's fine. I can tune into that, no problem. It's good to write. It's fun to write, and then it's fun to edit, and it's fun to think about truth, making people up to tell the truth. It's fun for me. It's the job for me to think to be a voyeur, like the character of Dead Papa Toothwort is, to listen ravenously to everyday language, to the way we speak to one another, to looking at people's body. Everything is fascinating to me, and that's presumably why I ended up doing this. But I then think that the challenge for me is structure. Is what do you do with those voices? How do you play them? So to me, the consistency between both books is in the way in which these things are juxtaposed. Like you have a fable or you have a sentimental domestic scene. You have something quite fabulous or you have something quite domestic. Those two things A and B are fine on their own. A is interesting, B is interesting, but what's interesting for me is the almost electric energy you can give a reader in the movement between those things, because you're then inviting the reader to think what was A and what is B, and how is he wanting me to think about the relationship between A and B, especially if it's between, as it were, realist and non-realist, or of this world and not of this world.
Right. So in case it's not clear, and in case you haven't read the book, we just heard sort of three of the main voices in the book, but also we do get grabs of lots of other people in the village, and we get those grabs in lots of different ways, right? And they change throughout the book. And so you're saying that for you, there's a difference between the process of kind of inventing and gathering, and then the process of shaping and refining. How do you go about that process of shaping and refining different voices and creating the electricity between the different styles of writing?
Well, the answer to that question, just as a prose writer, would be that I edit as I go. I worked this out the other day because someone said, "Do you miss your old job of being an editor?" And I realised I'm still doing it just on myself before the poor sentence has had a chance to hit the bloody page. I'm editing it, and that may be how I work. I'm just so resistant. You know, when you're writing, you're kind of feeling your way darkly through a kind of obstacle course, and the minute I feel I'm heading towards cliche or to a formulation that is unsatisfactory, or to even language, even syntax that doesn't have the necessary energy for me, I'm turning away from it, which means I don't write very much. These books aren't long, because I just don't want any of that flabby material in there. I want it to be sharp. But in answer to this question, these voices, it was very important to me that they are sound. The reason they dance on the page, to some readers, it's a gimmick, and that upsets me, because it's absolutely not a gimmick. It has characteristics with, concrete poetry and with the display of text on the page, and it's an homage because I love some of that, but it's absolutely not that. It's because it's sound. He is listening, and therefore it cannot look on the page as if it's me, as if it's coming from the conventions of the literary novel and bound by the same printed margins. It has to spill over that and violate that, because he's pulling it out of the living people. So for me then, it was a question of what do you actually put in that stuff in relation to the narrative voice or my characters. And I had rules, because I'm a sucker. I love a job. It couldn't be poetry. So it's unpoetic in as much as banal language or mundane daily language is not anti-poetic but non-poetic, and it's never punctuated, because that would be too easy. If I could allow myself punctuation, then I could celebrate the way people talk and the flow and rhythm of the language. It has to be individual points, and they have to be telling, but they can't be kitsch. And also, I want to create an English village, so I actually had to think very, very carefully. In ultra specificity is my game with that. Like, an English place now, an hour outside London, listened to by a voyeur who's maybe 20 or 30,000 years old and has lived in this place. What's he finding interesting? Is it the priest who would be when you meet characters in novels and you're like, oh, God, okay, hello, author, thinly disguised as priest. No, that's not what he'd be into. He'd be into, I've lost my fucking WhatsApp login, or what's up Dapper Two Chins, or what's Dapper Two Chins? Why do they call him El Gaz? What's El Gaz? It's a nickname. Is he called Gary? Where's it come from? What's Benders? Does he mean EastEnders? Does he mean Bender in a bun? He loves this. It's fascinating to him, and that has to be calibrated so it's interesting for the reader. I want you to gloss over it as if it's radio play in the background, but you also have to read it, because I start to sprinkle plot in there. So the more you've paid attention, the more you realise as you carry on with the book that it's patterned, and that the ornament in the top of the cathedral is in fact the cathedral itself, and it repays that effort. So all the time I'm playing a relatively novelistic game. This is a game between you and me, because I trust you to be doing some of this work, and I want to invite you to do some of this work, to be complicit in this, to invite yourself into the white space. But I'm also asking you to totally relax and trust me, and listen and enjoy and go there. And that's the fun bit of testing the text, testing the text against the characters, and then also because I'd never written a novel from scratch before, because the first book came out of my life and my doodles and my drawings. I realised writing this one that you can, all the things you hear writers say about, oh, my characters speak back to me and stuff. And I was like, really? It's true. They do. They come for you. And they say, no, that's not how I would feel about that. think harder about how I would feel. And also, and forget about how you feel about this thing. Like a character like Robert, towards the end of this book, I know people like Robert. I've met people like Robert. I'm not particularly like Robert in my lifestyle and in my choices and in my professional life, but I have thought carefully about people like him, and I had to put them all aside because they're not like him. I wanted it to be exactly him, Robert, that I'd made, who every fibre of his being I'm familiar with and I had to take out of the book, but I hope it's in there implicitly in him. How does he feel when his son goes missing? Even to think that he's feeling distraught or confused, these aren't good enough. These aren't, every verb attached to him it needs to be turned and checked again against the reality of this person and those around him. Can't remember your question, but there's your answer.
It was a great answer. So one of the ways that we get the voices of all of these characters in the village is that they come through Dead Papa Toothwort, who is this interesting, is he an invention? Is he drawn from folklore, from things like, there's a folkloric character called the Green Man, is that correct?
There's a Green Man pub today I saw on opposite Readings up the road. He's made up. There is no Dead Papa Toothwort, apart from in your own souls and under your beds, in your water. Maybe I should just read a bit. He's based on English folklore, but more than that, he's postmodern, so he's armed with the knowledge of what a device like that is. So he knows he's a literary device. He also knows that he's armed with insight into human characteristics that these living characters don't have. So it's funny I mentioned Kitsch again. You'll see like a bit like kind of, I guess, like if Mickey Mouse knew a lot about Walt Disney and what that industry of entertainment meant then in America in the context of the American empire, and like if you arm your innocent literary device with a knowledge of what the novel is, basically. Shall I try him?
Please. It's
difficult to read the voices. I've done this live a few times in London, and we recorded them so that they come in from a different place. You'd hear them from the side, so you would be Dead Papa Toothwort teasing these voices out. That's not possible, but I can give you a sense of it. This is when he's. Well, tell you what I'll do. I'll read him normally, and then I'll move the mic and give you. You'll know which is which. Dead Papa Toothwort. Dead Papa Toothwort lies underneath a 19th century vicar's wife and fiddles with the roots of a yew in her pelvis. He loves the graveyard. He listens. Fine so long as Jimmy's mum says so. When I die, make me into fat balls for the birds. 10 new highlighters from Petty Cash. Dylan needs a dimmer switch on that temper. A dick that big should be on a leash. Open plan kitchen, floral prints. Tom hasn't been at all well. A whippet's good nature. Overextended, new tractors, new fences. All pumped up and shine like a greasy pig. 10 of the rubber spatulas from the door-to-door criminal. Heavy limey soul. She can't pour Guinness, but we forgive that on account of her titties. More to life than the interweb. What will kill Brian Gould is old-fashioned self-pity. Dead Papa Toothwort remembers when they built this church. Compline and meditation. He's a fool to do it on the bank holiday. I haven't seen it yet, Jan, but I'm grateful for the prior warning. Rotting mouse. Biotech my ass. I kill pigs for a living. Wife swap. Pampers grass, hence the moniker Mad Gene. Dr. Horvath has now seen to my hemorrhoids. I'm apocalyptic about the bees. Salt of the earth. Oy vavoy. Here comes creepy Da Vinci. Lice again. Trinidadian, but everyone assumes Jamaican. Shiny new car. Scruple-free human. Nowhere to park. Hedges will be that man's Achilles heel. Fresh out of silk cut. Stone from afar. Flint from round here. Timber from these very woods. Local boys bring down the bodgers and set them to pews, set them to floral ornaments, a hymn board with ivy corners, an altar table with, yes indeed, there he is, a green man's head, grinning at the baptized and the married, the bored and the dead, biting down on limewood belladonna. He has been represented on keystones, decorative stencils, tattoos, the cricket club logo. He has been every English trinket and trash, moral for cash, mascot and curse. He has been in story form in every bedroom of every house of this place. He is in them like water, animal, vegetable, mineral. They build new homes cutting into his belt and he pops up, adapted to scare and define. In this place, he is as old as time.
Thank you.
So yeah, I don't want you to necessarily remember what time bell ringing practice is from these streamers things, but I mean, I just edited it. I just skipped a bit there. But for example, there's a mention of Mad Gene. There's a mention of a creepy single child. There's a mention of someone that thinks they're better than us. So the book starts to weave across itself all the things I'm interested in, but I don't think need to be done in a particularly heavy-handed fashion, like casual xenophobia, hostility to one's neighbour, suspicion, gossip, affection, or irrational affection between people in a community, the way a community bends in on itself in a time of crisis. And that sets me up, and you up, and him up, and then for part two.
So where did this interest in community, and also in perhaps a particularly English kind of community, this village life, come from? Because I think that you mentioned that a child goes missing. I guess that's not a spoiler if you said it. But that happens in the book. And that's the thing that kind of changes the tone of the book and sets the reader to reading something different in the second half. And village life starts to feel very claustrophobic very quickly when that happens. Where did that come from?
English villages are interesting places. I'm charmed by them, and they worry me. But they're also a really useful model. As a marriage is a useful model for the behavior of nation states, and a city is a really useful model for the behavior of continents in the world. You can map it all, and I as a scale to work with, to play with. I mean, I keep on describing myself as a unpleasant person, as a creepy novelist, but I liked the idea of building somewhere where I could know it like the back of my hand. I could walk up and down it. I could watch the play of light on buildings. I could consider what it might be like if someone's suddenly gone, where do you look first? You know that he plays in the pub garden. You know he has a camp in the woods. How do you go about suddenly realizing this place isn't safe? And so the scale of it was right for me. I also, he describes it as a kind of true classic English village in as much as it has twin hearts of church and pub. So all life is there. And it being a realistic place, I hope, it's an hour outside London. It would have had an agricultural identity maybe 60, 70 years ago. But it's now defined by its proximity to London. It would therefore have, if we're speaking realistically in demographic terms, it would have probably 1 or 2 Indian families. They would probably work in the shop. It would have Polish builders, Romanian builders. They would probably drink in one of the pubs, but not the posh one. The posh one would start to be charging 20, 30 pounds for a Sunday lunch when it used to be. I want it to be true. And I also felt that if I want to watch, like building a model of it, like a kid almost, building a train set, and only so that you can crash the train. I'm interested in that, in caring deeply enough for what you have invented so that you answer some of your own questions when something goes wrong, questions that you possibly weren't expecting because you weren't expecting to give as much of a shit as you do about what you've made up. So yeah, the scale of it was attractive to me. I also I started it about 10 or 15 years ago with a poem, sort of half poem, about Pete and Lanny and about art and education and some of the things you very kindly and eloquently said it was about. It was about trust. We were talking about this downstairs. That was written around about the time of Operation New Tree, where we were hunting, seeking to expose criminals, who had abused their positions of power and trust, particularly in the entertainment industry. We didn't get as far as Westminster, unfortunately. That remains covered up. And I wanted to sort of romanticize the idea of a true friendship, a true platonic and pedagogical relationship between an old man and a boy. And that seemed magical and radical and interesting and beautiful. And I still am very much in love with them. Anyone that's read the book, I love Pete and Lanny. That is the heart and soul of the book. I adore the closeness they have, and I adore the way Pete teaches Lanny. I'm not praising my own writing, I'm saying in real life I adore this. When there is no testing, no grading, nothing's good or bad, nothing's right or wrong, he is just simply encouraging Lanny to think about the relationship between his body and the earth and the planet and the mark on the page, how to make marks, how to tease shapes out of things, how to think about the form of things. It's gorgeous. I love it, and I want it for my children, and I want it to be... It's an act of resistance now against the way we do educate in most places in the world. So it was a sort of love song to that. And then my life changed, and I wrote a novel about grief, and that happened, and various political things occurred in the UK. And I suddenly thought, no, God, the last thing I want to do is write a novel about England. Like, it made me gag to even think of it, actually. And I thought all my characters would be kind of Daily Mail reading crones. And I limited myself to one Daily Mail reading crone, who's the least subtle bit in the book, but absolutely, Jesus Christ, you read those papers in the UK, they're not subtle. So then I thought, yeah, actually, I do want to write a novel about England now, but I need a character who can show me what this means in context, for whom Article 50 and the falling out with the EU would be a tiny blip. You know, Dead Papa Toothwort has seen great geological changes. You know, he's seen England detach itself from Europe. He's seen enclosure, civil war, witch trials, burnings. Most importantly for him, probably the significant events for him recently are he suddenly realizes the air is bad and that people are pumping poisons into the water that he drinks. Those are significant developments for him. Article 50 less so. You know, so I wanted to kind of, in a way, it's a cathartic book for an English person at the moment because it steps back. Yeah. And I thought, what if a tree was watching a village? What would it have to say? What would it be interested in? What might it fall in love with? And it falls in love with Lanny for the same reasons I'm just describing to you.
Right. Thank you. And what about Lanny himself? Because we haven't spoken about him very much, but he is at the...
You said he goes missing.
And I'd say it again. He's at the center of the book. He's the thing that drives the plot. He's in the title. Yeah. How did you come up with this character, and why? What is it about this figure of sort of a mysterious child as well? Because he is mysterious.
Well, I love to write about children. It comes easy to me because I am childlike, and I have young children. And you know, a lot of writers be like, you know, keep the door closed, Daddy's working. I desperately keep the door open, and I love that moment when they pour back in and. For the dangers of being a literary novelist, you know, it's self-absorption, writer's block, all this shit people talk about. Just let the kids come in, because it pours, you know, trickling, wonderful, eccentric, funny, innovative language, and bickering and teasing and bullying, all the things I want to write, all the things I'm interested about. I mean, it's very annoying not to be able to get any work done, but nevertheless, like Jolie says in the book, when Lanny comes in and interrupts her working, she says she realizes with a curious mix of bemusement and joy that Lanny is her muse. That's the relationship. It's pure inspiration and nurture. So I like writing about kids. Lanny is the cavity at the middle of the book. He's the only writer. He's the only character I know nothing about. I didn't think of him at all. I just thought, in as much detail as I possibly could, what other people think of him. So he's like a mirror ball in a way. Some people think he's precocious and fey and annoying and pretentious, and some people think he's just wonderful and strange, and some people are intimidated by him. Robert sees him as a sort of rebuke to his characteristics and his job, and Jolie, the mother, sees him as a sort of challenge to her own creative self. You very rarely hear him speak, and when you do, you're only really hearing him speak to see how much it annoys his dad, or worries his mum, or interests Pete, or turns on Dead Papa Toothwort, and then he's gone. And you see a whole village do this. Talk about what they thought of him, or how they considered him, or in what ways he challenged them, or how they think they're supposed to behave. How are you supposed to, you know, one of them says, missing children are never idiots, are they? They're always so special, so loved. And so it's a sort of, he becomes a sort of a mirror ball for our political sensibilities as well, you know. How are you supposed to think, and where do those expectations come from? Are they conditioned by the newspapers you read, or whether you're raised in the church, or what is your moral architecture? And nothing like a missing child throws that in, you know, throws light on that. Right. I don't describe him. He's never aged. That's the job of other people in the book to do that.
Was it difficult to? I'm trying to think how to phrase it. Was it difficult to make that sort of a space at the center of the book without confusing readers, or was it always a very kind of clearly defined space for you around this character?
I mean, I don't mind confusing my reader. What I want is the reader to be on very soggy ground. I wanted this in my first book as well, thinking, what is this about? And then land them on hard ground. And I don't think you should do much mucking around with that. I think you should do that straight away. So the book opens with a sort of prose poem, really, where Dead Papa Toothwort, it's like a tuning fork. Bang, this is a book about language. So Dead Papa Toothwort turns all this lovely, mulchy language around in his mouth, and quite understandably, you don't know what's going on. You don't know what that is particularly. And it might be more like a myth or a fable or a kid's book or a poem or all those things that I'm borrowing from because I just love it. And then you land absolutely straightforwardly on a character called Pete saying he was asked if he could give the character some art lessons. So that's your firm ground. And then I want to knock you off that nice firm ground back into the mulch. And that way together we build a thing. And your involvement is crucial. So that's how I did it really. And then with Lanny, it's what I mean about like finding in the dark what's not true, what's not true enough, or good enough actually, in linguistic terms. I've got this analogy which is not great, I need to work on it, but it's about the poem and how the poem is a dark room and you navigate through this dark room, and then often the way a poem finishes, I'm very preoccupied with endings, as you'll know if you've got to the end of Lanny. The way the poem ends is the poet flicking on the light behind them as they leave, so you can see what... when the poem finishes, you start to do the thinking about what the poem's done to you. And I wanted some of that with Lanny. I want Lanny to step up out of the last page of the book, really, and you to start to think about Lanny in your life, you as Lanny, Lanny as nothing, Lanny as Dead Papa Toothwort, etc., etc. So all I need to do is know what not to do with Lanny. So, for example, there was a scene where Lanny thinks he has upset Pete by asking whether Pete is gay. And I liked it because the conversation was good between them and interesting, and I was moved by it because of conversations I've had or witnessed with people about subjects like that, where the world of childhood straightforwardness is actually an extraordinary gift, because adults become so cluttered and so counterproductive with a kind of bump of their sensitivity or their political correctness or their desire not to offend, or watching an adult, especially men, blunder their way towards a question like that. It's just heartbreaking to watch. Like the kind of trappings of conversational trappings. Like, like, get on with it. Ask the question like a child would. So Lanny asked Pete whether he's gay because he's heard his parents talking about it. And then he worries he's offended Pete. Anyway, it was in terms of scenes in novels, it was fine. It was a bit novel-y for my liking. It was a bit exposition-y. I felt like I was ladling on. I was like, I don't need to have this. We don't need to see Lanny doing this. We know Lanny does stuff like this really well. We feel that from Lanny. We don't need to be shown it. Similarly, the question of Pete's sexuality, apart from the piece I read where Pete refers to a piece of abuse suffered by him, and probably even misremembered by him in terms of the vocabulary years ago. That's all we need to know. I don't need to lay it on. It's not my job. I don't need to be telling you about this character's sexuality. That's for you to think about, decide. So that was how I built Lanny, really, was by unbuilding him. Every time I was tempted to build him, unbuild him. Because it was a bit like in my first book, I had the mum written. And I wrote her in extraordinary detail, like hyper-realistic detail, the experience of her death. And I literally heard my characters yelling at me not to do it. Please don't do that, because you're robbing from us the opportunity to describe her in absentia, which is much more powerful and much closer to the experience of love that you're trying to get at, the pain of love, is if we remember her and misremember her. If you do that, it's like putting a picture of what Jane Eyre looks like on the cover of Jane Eyre. Don't, please. I need to work out what Jane Eyre looks like.
All right, I'm going to ask kind of one more question
about...
Like a
bob, little tortoiseshell glasses, brogues. Why? What does your Jane Eyre look like?
Well, my Jane Eyre actually just looks like a... I'm not going to tell you what my Jane Eyre looks like, because it doesn't look like a person, I guess, now that I think about it.
Right, exactly.
Exactly like a person. But maybe...
sorry, just quickly, I did a reading in an old people's home the other day. Very interesting thing to do. I say yes to this stuff, and I wish I could go back to the old people's home, but I think they're not going to invite me again. One thing to note is they're all women. There's no men at the Culture Club for old people, and I've been asked to recruit some old men, and I think that's literally going to involve me going up to some old men and going, "Do you want to go to the Culture Club?" So I said, "Can I have some leaflets or something to make me feel official while I do it?" The second thing is they all wear purple. You know that poem, "When I'm old, I will wear purple"? They've done it. All of them in purple. The one woman that wasn't wearing purple, I was like, oh, I should really let the side down. When she got up, great big purple jacket. And the third thing that happened was I was talking about Dead Papa Toothwort and myth, and how each culture has their own myths, and in England we've particularly plugged it into these kind of pre-Roman things that have been appropriated by the church and appropriated by pubs, and now have been appropriated by a slightly worrying kind of blood and soil, English nationalism, English land for English people thing, nature writing. It's all getting a tiny bit worrying. The circle joins. As he says, tattoos, cricket club logos, blah, blah, blah. And this old woman went, like that? There he is, behind you. And I was like, and there was an applique green man on the wall behind me that they'd done in their stitching classes, like coming out of the ivy. It's absolutely fantastic.
Right.
So I was like, well, yes, quite, that's him, yes. Like, of all the places I've done gigs, the old people's home had the best props.
Is this in Bath where you live
in Bath, yeah.
Right. And did that have anything to do with your kind of interest in small community life, or does it not feel like that smaller community?
No, Bath's a proper city. Yeah. My German publisher described Bath in my biog as a small village, and I was like, you're going to offend the people of Bath. No, Bath's a city. I live in a small little villagey part of it, but no, this was written before that move. I did grow up in a place like this, and when I was thinking about Lanny and this chorus of voices, I did go back to some villages like that and listened. It's so nice to listen. And also I have a mother-in-law who is like that. You can just listen to my mother-in-law, and it's like one of those wonderful Alan Bennett monologues. She goes, she never draws, I don't know where she breathes from. She must have a vent in the back of her head. She goes, I'm sorry to Trina. Trina's ridiculous. It's only a bad name. It's some kinds of go. It's too many good races. And I said to Graham, there is absolutely no way you will get that man into a car, and I'm not getting in that car with him with that bad name. I said, it's not hardly fair. He's still going down the road. She never stops. So I occasionally would just lift a trunk, pop it straight in. But I know I went back to these villages, and you do as an urban person, as a city dweller, you do realise that it's like theatre in as much as the cast is smaller, and so you really do know what people are up to, and you do see curtains moving, and you do see what people are planting and growing and eating and what's being delivered to them, and you think, that's funny. 9 Tesco bags, she only usually gets 3. She must have the kids coming home. And so you're all becoming kind of amateur detectives like a novelist is. So as a novelist in one of those places, you're like, what have I been seen looking at, and how can I adequately change it? Like in the notice board as well, bell ringing. I think this is my favourite thing I saw. Bell ringing's been moved to 5 because of Jean's bad knee, right? And then underneath it is written, not because of my bad knee, because of Pam being away. Like, how bad was Jean's knee in the first place that she managed to get out of the house to read the thing to correct it? So that, glorious human stuff. Lovely, lovely, lovely human stuff.
Speaking of voices, of listening to multiple voices, I think it's time for audience questions.
I heard this great interview with you, Max, about with the guy from Peaky Blinders, and you were talking about writing to music, and especially to kind of complex jazz and polyrhythms. I just wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
That's a nice question, thanks. I think what you're referring to is the question of whether I write to music. Where's he gone? I just don't like it when novelists put their answer back into the ether. I'd like to tell you. So if you could stay there under the spotlight, like a good audience member, thank you. I'd read Philip Pullman saying he couldn't write to music, and it was just an atrocious idea because how are you supposed to hear the music of your own sentence if there's some other music playing? And I just thought, I feel really sorry for you because I love to write to music. There are certainly times when I need silence. But I think what I said in that interview with Killian was that you can achieve a kind of dynamic syncopation against another type of music. I'm writing into the oral tradition. I want my prose to be getting up and moving. I want it to have rhythm. Doesn't mean I need to speak it out loud when I'm doing it, but I want it to have that in it, because that's to me, that's the whole point. Even your most mundane, even my shopping list should have some pleasure in the language. I want to be thinking about what you're doing with the 26 keys, as it were. So I think that was what I was getting at. The other thing was that when I wrote my first book, which was much more poetic in style because it was about poetry, but it was about an homage to another person's poetry, and I didn't want to be thinking about their poetry. So then I listened a lot to African blues music because I needed a driving rhythm to be pushing against, especially with the crow, because I was trying to create a book that was bird-like and particularly corvid-like, so they hopped, the hopping, the pecking all the time, the looking all the, I want my language to be looking all the time and drawing from the left and drawing from the right, and there's just nothing more perfect, I found, than like Mali and blues music for that. Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you. I was interested in this idea of the postmodern novel of the voice. And I feel like we have a culture that's, particularly with the internet, with listicle, a very like list-prone culture. But as someone who's interested in writing, I'm interested in reading lists, and I wondered if you had a particular kind of canon of the modern novel of the voice, or if you just kind of discovered it by doing it. Thank you.
That's a nice question. I don't have a reading list, no. I mean, what I would say, I mean, I suppose it's to borrow like a definition of postmodernism that is A, 30 or 40 years old now, but B, probably architectural, to do with the mixing of styles and the kind of polluting of the canon with the canon's own authority, so that, we undermine the authority of Greek columnists by painting them back, or, and then historical revisionism as well being a principle at work in the way you read as well as you write. For me, that means ignoring or, wherever possible, actively disrupting said canon, or indeed the hierarchies imposed on us by capitalist ways of selling and distributing literature. So I just don't buy, I'm not even interested in any really well-written think pieces about fantasy versus literary. It's just bullshit, all of it. Similarly, as a consumer, I don't like the idea that an algorithm can recommend me X based on my liking of X. It's just, one Ian McEwan novel is really good, the next one's shit. I'll decide, thank you. It's fine to say that. I'm sure he'd say it himself. But I want to decide on that, and I don't want that decided for me by the publisher or the award system or any kind of, as I say, any kind of silo-based thinking about what is that. So for me, if these are have a postmodern sensibility, experimental. One of the really lovely reviews of this in the UK posited it as kind of, as an experimental novel, but don't worry, you'll enjoy it. As if experimentalism is an exclusionary thing, which it often has been, and I'm not mad about that too, but all novels are experiments. They're experiments in building a world and asking your reader to spend 16, 18 hours in that world. And I think you can be relatively visible about that now. There's no point. I'm not tricking the reader. I want you on board in the experiment, and I want to show you the scaffolding of the experiment so that when I put the heart in, you really see it and feel it, I hope. But in terms of a reading list, for me, that just means everything. And I mean your shopping list, the tweets of a deranged president, comic books, children's books. I read a lot of children's books because the plotting is so good and the world building is so impactful and effective. I read essays, a lot of essays. I read beautiful illustrated books about, tectonic. I want it all. I want to be ravenous, and I want that ravenousness not necessarily to relate to an individual project, but I want it to be there when I need it. Like I want to draw on it. If I was just reading literary fiction by novelists like Max Porter, Christ, I'd shrivel up like a prune. So I think you have to read widely. For me, reading outside of one's national literary tradition is probably the most important. Like if I were to give creative writing students one piece of advice, read translated literature. Just gobble up as much translated literature as you possibly can. Because otherwise you're just alone in a white room. Thank you. My jazz question didn't get a round of applause.
Hi, Max. My name's Matt. So there's a lot of beauty in your books, but there's also a lot of terror and touching on topics. I think that is anyone's nightmare, to the point that, as a reader, there are times when you think you can't go on. You can't read anymore. So my question is, do you realise that you're doing this to people? And if so, have you got an innate sense about how far you can push your reader before they do have to abandon it because it is so terrifying, or giving them enough to get them through to the end of the book?
Good. I don't know yet, and I'm really interested to find out. I want to write about intimacy, and I want to see how intimate it is possible to be with a reader on your shoulder while you go to a place. And I also am interested in violence because of the way we've emptied out shock, and because of the supposed violence of the visual medium we were working in, the kind of the Paul Virilio stuff about the intensity of violence in our minds and our screens. There was a moment in my first book. Have you read my first book? You don't have to have done, Matt. Get out!
But I did put it down.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
I put it down, and I actually came back to it after I finished Lanny, and I thought, I can do this. I can finish this book.
Well, because also it's like Gorecki's Symphony or something. The terrible pain you live through. You know you are coming to a major chord. You know I'm going to do that. You trust me to do that. And I think I earn the major chords, I hope. You have to earn them. You can't just wham them out there. I wrote the scene, you know when the crow tells them to build a model of their mother? And it's a competition. And if any of you ever see the stage play of my first book, it's a devastating thing, really. To watch it. Anyway, I wrote that originally as a fancy dress game where he says you dress up, and first they dress up as each other, which makes visible the sibling as one thing, and then they dress up as their dad. It's kind of funny because they get his body language just right, and then there's a long pause, and they dress up as Crow. There's all sorts of flapping and banging, and then there's a long pause, and he thinks the game's over, and then his wife comes in, and she is made of them. They are two naked boys, and they are his one naked wife, and I did not like that. It upset me. It was too close to uncanny thoughts I'd had over the years about people I love that aren't here anymore, and it somehow felt voyeuristic in a way that was part of my operation rather than the truth and coherence of the novel as a work of art's operation. It doesn't sound too wanky. So I changed it. I realized I'd gone too far. So I guess coming up to that line and testing it, with this, I can't deny that I'm writing in a way about an industry, $1 million industry, as Jolie says, of books that are titillatory about violence done to the bodies of mainly women and children and missing children and stuff like that. And that's peculiar. It's an odd characteristic for a civilization, this industry. So I thought, well, I'm not doing anything here that is, if anything, I'm just peeling back that mask and asking you to think about that, which is why in the second half you have people actually thinking about that. And even within the kind of so-called coherence of a marriage, people saying, are you really thinking that? And so I want exactly your question to be in the mind of the reader, and I guess I don't, only to the point where it isn't audibly me asking it to you. When, like, for example, my problem with endings, I want to fiddle around with the ending and do some stuff with the ending, but not to the point where you go, oh, where it's like, Max Potter doing funny things with endings, that would be awful. It has to be exact up to that point. And I do want to be moved. The music joins with the gentleman's first question about music. I want, because of the time it takes to imbibe a novel and the way novels have to go into your brain, it's slower than music. And I often listen to music and feel drenched in heartache and beauty, and that be an ecstatic thing I go to, singular, unique to music. And I reckon the novel can do that a bit more. And that involves pain. It must involve pain in order to have the uplift and the ecstasy afterwards. So yeah, I would guess that will be, your question is, in a way, quite a neat definition of what I'm trying to get up to as a writer, yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Ask the lady with the mic.
Please.
Yeah, I'd love you to. I liked your first question.
So you said that Lanny...
I'd love it if your second question was like, Marmite or Vegemite.
So you said that you loved Lanny and Pete and that they were the heart of the novel. And yet, poor Pete gets completely decimated. I mean, a great artist, with fame and compassion and learning, and gets turned basically into a pedophile murderer. You know, so what was it like when you said...
Spoiler!
I reckon you should...
Yeah.
You know, I think you should be able to talk
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
to the whole book. I mean, what was that? So you said you love Pete, and you know it was the heart of the book, and you want people like Pete. And look at what you did to Pete. What was that like?
I mean, look what we're doing to Pete. Look what we are. Look how. I mean. Look what we have done to the most sensitive and interesting people. We censor them, we call them weird, we call them eccentric, we call them strange, we call them dangerous. We have to have a better relationship to ourselves and to our kind of ecosystems of trust and creativity. I really worry about anti-intellectualism and conservatism and a kind of culture of moralization. Basically, I want a kind of open-heartedness to the artistic project and to the reception of art into the world. And I also believe that Pete represents to me a kind of the avant-garde, or even the hippies of the 70s. Where did they end up? They ended up hurt, ridiculed, mocked, not allowed to exist in the system. You know, capitalism, I mean, I don't want to sound like some kind of a rabid anti-capitalist, because I'd be an arch hypocrite if I was, you know, sitting here in my new Nikes. But many things aren't possible in this system, particularly in its sort of dying days. It's extremely difficult to be as lovely as Pete is, because you'd have to do a CBD check, and then you'd have to be told that you actually got to stick to the curriculum, and then everyone in the village would think you're a paedophile. And you know, and I suppose that what you're saying is how did it feel to do that to Pete? It felt absolutely my job as a novelist, in the same way as killing the mother in my first book felt absolutely my job to do that, because there's no point mucking around. You got to kill the cat on page 1 if you want it to be a novel about how much you miss your cat. I don't think this is what I mean about trusting the reader and knowing that the reader is highly accomplished. Like, you don't need 300 pages to know the cat before I kill him. You've all had cats. You've all lost cats. I don't know how far I'm going to take the cat metaphor. But I don't need to tell you what it's like to lose a cat. You know. So all I need to do is write about these people who have lost their cat and explode it out and borrow lots of different ways of thinking about the death of a cat, so that you can come in and share this cat death with me. Enough!
Well, that's all we have time for, actually. Thank you so much, and thanks, everyone. Those were terrific questions, and thanks, Max Porter.
Yeah.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.